Welcome. We're very lucky today to have Michael Fairney, who's a criminal lawyer in Canada. And he's very kind, because we actually had done a little while ago, in the middle of the truckers' protest, a very fascinating and extensive interview with him and Liz Hodgson, a former CBC correspondent, about the truckers' protest in Ottawa, about mandates over COVID. And it was just fascinating. Unfortunately, I didn't hit the record button, or I didn't hit it hard enough, but it disappeared, so I couldn't post it. And he agreed kindly to come back and talk about it from a legal perspective. He has his own law firm in Ontario, in Toronto, doing criminal law. And he's going to tell us a little bit about that. He's here today. Also, he's wearing a t-shirt. Could we begin? You can introduce yourself, give the website for your law firm and your blog and so forth, and then explain your t-shirt to us.
Yeah, so my name is Michael Fairney, and my website, which is primarily for law, it's just called michaelfairneylaw.com. And that just is a way of contacting me if you have professional issues or criminal law issues or legal issues. But it's not really a blog per se. I don't really write there. What I do is mostly just on Facebook, just on my own page. I used to have a very, very open page, and I would post, whatever you want to call it, provocative posts. And I would get tons of people in, like friends, lawyers, but also lots of outside people, and often lots of leftists, so to speak. And they would attack. They would like smell blood. And it was kind of fun because, like we'd get like 200-300 comments on a thread. It was like a lot of things going on. And it was almost like a party, because it was very much a free speech kind of space. But then I started getting people who were very nasty, like in that cancel culture sort of way, talking about doxing and stuff like that, and making complaints to the Law Society about political statements, which is ridiculous. So I had to close it down a little. But if you are listening to this and you want to friend me, Michael Fairney, Toronto, I'd be happy to do that. And then you could check out whatever posts I have. That's my main outlet. But yeah, so anyway, as for this t-shirt, it says "Free the North." There's a Canada maple leaf. And this was kind of a t-shirt that was popular at the anti-COVID rallies in Toronto. So I picked one up there. And, of course, then you had but that was like a year ago. And that long before these trucker rallies came along. And the trucker rallies are over now, as we were discussing, right? So my question to you, Lawrence, is how do you interpret like whether I win the bet or not that we made last week?
The bet was whether or not there was going to be, in the last episode, which no one will see but us, there was a bet, what's going to happen? And Liz said there's going to be a crackdown, I'm afraid. And Michael said, oh no, we're all Canadians. And at the last minute, people will come to a reasonable compromise, and the truckers will go home, and the mandates will be lifted, and everyone will live happily ever after. Now, there was a crackdown first.
Yes.
After the crackdown, the mandates have been lifted, and the Emergency Act has been lifted. But unfortunately, a poor Mohawk tribal elder in a scooter got trampled by a horse. And I saw on Twitter, she said she's going to move to Florida now. So I don't know how the Seminole and the Calusa Indians are going to feel about that, but that's not my department. And the fact of the matter is, he did crack down. He didn't shoot anyone like they did in Washington, but they trampled them. So, I mean, it is true. It's a kinder, gentler country in Canada, but still it was a little shocking to us. Although, let's talk about this a little bit. My own view was, I didn't know what would happen, but at the outset of a negotiation, you say the other side, they say, hey, I don't want to have a shot which might have side effects of a heart attack because I'm driving alone on the highway. And I don't want my kids to have to wear masks in school because it's affecting their development. And then the response from Trudeau was, you're a white supremacist, racist, fascist. That doesn't sound like a good faith discussion of the issue at hand. I mean, it seems that sort of sets the tone that there isn't actually going to be a actual discussion about it.
Absolutely. Although, I mean, I will say, I mean, that whole issue to me is funny because, like, I'm not an expert on that movement per se, but there's always been this thing saying, oh, you know, there's these white supremacists who are, you know, at the core of this organization. And I mean, and then so it becomes an evidentiary issue, right? Like, is it full of Nazis or is it not? And my answer has always been, I don't know. Um, and the people who are against it are like, there's no question, they're all Nazis. And now I think this Pat King guy who just got denied bail recently, one of the organizers, apparently he has made some statements that are on that, you know, whatever, right supremacist, white nationalist sort of, you know, kind of viewpoint. But that's just hearsay. I haven't investigated myself. The other thing is, there were these Nazi flags at the rally. And this is becoming this weird thing in Canada now where you get accused of being a Nazi when you accuse somebody else of being a Nazi. Because when they were showing those flags with the Canadian flag with the swastika on it, it didn't mean we're Nazis. It meant the Canadian government is acting like Nazis by dictating all these rules, you know? And it
Sort of
gets
like the soup Nazi in Seinfeld.
yeah, and it's just so funny, like Nazi, and by the way, like 90% of my friends are Jewish. I'm an honorary Jew. I'm the least anti-Semitic person possible. But I know that Jews love to make, you know, Nazi type jokes, dark humor. The more, you know, edgy Jews I know will make those. You know what I'm saying? And the soup Nazi is a perfect example. That's Seinfeld and Larry David making a joke about a soup Nazi. It's an outrageous joke, right? There were probably a lot of Jews who might have been offended by that.
I don't know. But the point is that let's
Oh,
talk about this from a legal point of view. I watched this Viva Frey on YouTube, and he
okay.
says, in fact, the protests didn't violate any laws until the injunction came out. They got a court injunction that said you couldn't blow your horn and you couldn't disturb the peace, essentially.
Yes.
And that was outlawed. But anything else wasn't covered by the injunction that they got. You're a criminal lawyer. Was it
Uh-huh.
a crime for these truckers to park in Ottawa and protest?
Well, if yes, in the sense that this mischief, which is what they're charged with, is, you know, property destruction, but it's also prevention of enjoyment of property. So the argument is that, you know, they prevented people from being able to sleep and being able to run their business and so on. And so that was the mischief aspect of it.
And is that what we would call a misdemeanor in our country?
Oh, well, then no, because a misdemeanor in your country, there's a similar situation. You have misdemeanors and felonies. In Canada, you have summary conviction offenses and indictable offenses. And they're the same thing, the minor version and the major version. So mischief is generally speaking a what you would call a misdemeanor, but they define it usually by money. So there's mischief under $5,000 or mischief over $5,000. So if you were to like blow up a power plant, that would be obviously major, right? And it would be mischief over. So it depends on the circumstance.
So you were following this. You told me you were in protests for many years. They never were covered by the press until Ottawa was occupied by those truckers. They were trying to ignore it.
Yeah.
You also didn't go to Ottawa, but you expressed some sympathy for the cause. Why do you think Canadians, they said polling showed about 1/3 favored the truckers. Why do you think Canadians felt sympathy for the truckers at all? Because as an American, the most amazing thing was to see Canadians speaking out when we were just sitting quietly. And even if they were crushed, to me, like I was telling my better half, the fact that anybody spoke out was inspiring, that they took a risk. And, you know, that's like the early days in Solidarity. They started years before communism fell. Why do you think that 1/3 of Canadians felt sympathy for the truckers?
Well, I would think it might actually be much higher, because the question is, there's two questions. You say, are you frustrated and had enough with COVID restrictions and you think they're ridiculous and you won't take it anymore? That's question number one. And that proportion, I think, is much higher than 32%. I think it's like 80%. I very rarely meet people who are like hardcore, panicking about COVID. Very rarely. And most people, but now, do you support the truckers becomes a question of, do you support all the noise they're making, and do you want to be associated with the occupation and closing a bridge? At that point, the number goes down, right? Because Canadians are very law-abiding. Nobody wants anything too seriously. But my whole thing about the truckers was always, as you mentioned earlier, we'd go to these rallies and there'd be 5,000 people there, and there would not be any press at all, and it wouldn't even be on TV.
Honestly, I had no idea there was opposition in Canada until I saw the truckers.
Precisely. And so there was okay, I'd be on Facebook and I'd be, I hate COVID, blah, blah, blah. And I'd get support, but it was like, in the 10s and 20s. You go to a rally, there's like 5,000 people, and it gets ignored. And you're like, what do you have to do to get noticed? And, I was at a loss, but the truckers were amazing because of the simple device of having a truck that you can live in. It's like you're camped out and protesting. It's the perfect thing, because normally if you go protest, you have to leave. Eventually you have to go eat, you have to go home, you have to go to sleep. You're not going to camp out, but they basically did camp out, and you can't move a truck. It's like you can go in a tent, you can just rip it down, an encampment like that, that's very easy to get rid of. So it just created a logistical thing that was so funny because, the police didn't want to be heavy-handed, and the tow truck drivers were, staying, neutral or staying out of it. And so that was the great thing. It's like they stumbled on this brilliant protesting device that couldn't be ignored. And now it became like this huge thing, and then it dragged on, which meant it became more international, and like literally international. And then, but I feel like once they started blocking the bridge, that was too much. Like that became serious. Like now you're vandalizing the country, It's a much more serious thing. So at that point, I think people are kind of like, well, what is this about realistically? Is it about, and that's why people would start saying, well, it's not just about COVID. They want to overthrow the government, and then where was it going to lead? So I'm glad it wound up being relatively peaceful.
Although at the end, there was some police brutality, allegedly, including mounted police trampling an elderly Mohawk woman on a scooter. And I saw some other video of some people being roughed up, which may be normal, but it doesn't look nice.
Well, those incidents were so, okay, first off, the trampling was a horse. I think this woman fell down and a horse walked like over and around her.
Oh.
But the horse did not actually like
stomp on her.
Yeah, and it was all slow motion. The woman standing there. It's like you fall in front of a car and it, kind of goes around you or something.
Oh, okay.
But so yeah, in fact, the whole police strategy was to create a line, and not let anybody pass, and then after like 20 minutes, walk 10 feet further, all in sync, and then just very slowly move people back, but no confrontations individually. It was a very good tactic, actually, and that's kind of why I felt like I'd won the bet, because I was saying, oh, it did end peacefully. But you're right. I mean, it was a police crackdown. The truckers didn't leave voluntarily.
Yeah,
so
I think that's sort of the hinge of the argument. It's too bad Liz isn't here to collect her winnings on camera like sweepstakes, but that's life. Let me ask you another question. The two organizers are in jail, Pat King and Tamara Leach. Is that right?
Yes.
Uh, they've been denied bail.
Mhm.
You're a criminal lawyer. Is that normal or is that unusual? And what do you project is going to happen?
Well, that's a really good question, because the general feeling is that it's absolutely ridiculous that they didn't get bail. Okay, that's the general feeling. And this is interesting too, because I go on the Criminal Lawyers Association listserv. I hear opinions of lawyers, and the about 90% of the lawyers were thought it was ridiculous. There are the hardcore anti-convoy, pro-COVID restrictions type people. They found ways to argue that it was warranted that these people stay in jail, but but overwhelmingly, the lawyers I know thought they should have gotten bail. And there's two other issues to that. Number one, there is sort of a faint, hook to hang that sort of detention on, but the primary thing is that the main argument is that possibly the bail hearings weren't really handled that well by the lawyers. Do you want me to tell you, like, how deeply do you want me to go into the legal aspect?
Well, just can people be held indefinitely without bail in Canada?
Oh, no, they have a bail hearing. They had a bail hearing, and they lost the bail hearing, so they're not being held, indefinitely. Right now, they're they actually have an appeal. They can appeal the detention order, and after that, it's a question of what happens. Do they choose to plead guilty, or is there a trial? One of the side issues is that apparently they've seen saying that the Crown attorney is looking for a high sentence for these guys. So it's the same thing. Like, is that really going to happen? I mean,
I don't
are
know.
you,
They want to make an example of them, and there's no legal defense fund with some top super lawyer to defend. I mean, in the United States, if any Black Lives Matter or Antifa person is arrested, they immediately get, super lawyers who are paid by Hollywood celebrities, and they're out. So it's a question to me. How much? I mean, can these people just be kept? How long? When would the trial take place?
in Canada, it can take like a year to get to trial. Well, but the thing, okay, if you're in custody, you do get a quicker trial. But I would say, depending on how quickly the lawyer, if it were definitely going to trial, it would depend how quickly the lawyers wanted to get organized. But I'd say they could have a trial, shortest like 2 or 3 months.
Okay, so because we have some people in Washington from January 6th for trespassing, still in jail, and it's unbelievable. So let me ask you another question. The money issue, the banks, we discussed that a little bit before we started recording. A number of people, you said it's 100 or so, had their banks freeze their accounts. Was that precedented in this kind of situation? You're a criminal lawyer. Does that happen before you're found guilty of anything?
It's the precedent is when they preemptively freeze bank accounts of people who are suspected of criminal activity, such as drug dealing, or more importantly, terrorist offenses. So they're really putting this, but like that's under the normal law. The emergency powers gave them the power to freeze these accounts as if they were terrorists. And that's the real thing that's been strange about all this. They're saying, well, that's kind of like where they start blocking the bridge. The problem is then it's kind of like it is kind of getting up to that level of seriousness. This is no longer just blocking some local street or creating noise for some little old lady. This is blocking. This is sabotage, right?
Well, I agree with you, except on the
So
other side, the left has been doing, at least in the United States, and I don't approve of it, and I wish they would arrest them, civil disobedience blocking highways for years. And I know in Canada you had something where they hacked a pipeline with some axes recently in some sort of protest, and they haven't been prosecuted in the same way. But you know, Martin Luther King sat down and they marched on the bridge in whatever, the Edmund Pettus Bridge. That's his famous protest, you know. So blocking bridges, I don't support it, but you could see where they go, okay, well, this is civil disobedience and people would be arrested and you'd clear the bridge, you know. So it's an interesting question to now say that which used to be considered nonviolent protest is now violence and treating it like terrorism.
But the difference is that even in the early 60s of Martin Luther King, when he would go and block a bridge, it was just him, like, physically there with his supporters. So they were very vulnerable. It was very easy to disperse them. You just drive a car through them and they'll get, you know, slowly, and they get rid of them. The Ambassador Bridge was like another 500 trucks. And there was the same problem. You can't move them. And those guys can live inside their trucks because they have little cabs. So they're like, I can stay here, you know, it's a siege. Like they can stay there all day. So the comparison is there. But once again, the logistics, you know, if Martin Luther King had driven a bunch of trucks onto that bridge, it would have been the same thing, except probably the tow truck drivers in Selma would have been happy to move the trucks. You know, they probably would have been very anti.
I don't know. That's hypothetical. The question is, so you don't think these people are necessarily going to get unfrozen then if they use anti-terrorism legislation?
Well, no, I think we're saying as well, all that's over. All the accounts have been unfrozen. The Emergency Act is over. It's all done. And I don't know what's going to happen with the money. I don't know whether they can access it or whether Give, Send, Go can distribute it or send it back to donors. That's a good question. That's a kind of interesting, that's a good question. But I just want to say, going back to the blockade issue, that you're right. The tactic of blockading streets or avenues or train tracks, whatever, is a classic civil disobedience move. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's not terrorism. Nobody called Martin Luther King a terrorist. That's peaceful civil disobedience, right?
Yeah.
The blowing up a bank is violent revolutionary terrorist activity.
Right.
Civil disobedience is just sitting there saying, I'm going to stay here. You're going to have to move me. It's embarrassing for you, blah, blah, blah. And if you go too far, it's even more embarrassing. And we're putting ourselves in harm's way. So it's a, you know, it is total classic civil disobedience. It's not terrorism. And that's really, that's the problem here in Canada. You know, they didn't know how to deal with it. And people call it insurrections. And it's just classic, like you say, classic civil disobedience. Nothing unusual about it.
Let me ask you another question. Since you went to many of these protests, did you see people yelling at and harassing passersby wearing masks?
Not at all. But at the same time, those protests were so huge that there were no non-protesters there.
I understand, but when you were at this protest, was the mood angry, white supremacist, Nazi?
Not at all. No, not at all. In fact, it was all very happy, friendly. It was like a circus. It was like being at a rock concert. People literally throwing beach balls around, and it was a totally, like, there would be speakers, and the speakers would be, you know, fists in the air, you know, free Canada, all this stuff, and we won't stand for it. But it wasn't like we're going to kill anybody. It was, you know, that was just the message, like, end these COVID restrictions.
And that message of ending COVID restrictions would seem to me to be not really a threat to anybody, especially as now, for instance, we found in the United States, the CDC is going to lift its mask requirement in March. That in fact, the data seems to show a lot of the measures that were enacted were ineffective and there was no point to them.
Yeah. Well, that's another weird thing about the situation right now. Because a lot of restrictions are ending right now, and we're sort of scheduled to end anyway, two things happen. there's an argument about whether the protests caused the restrictions to end, or the counter argument is like, oh, the fact that they're doing it when COVID restrictions are ending already shows that COVID restrictions were never their real issue. In fact, they're fascist Nazis who want to take over the country. You know, they're dying to have the smear tactic be the main story.
But
Dying.
why is it allowed? And I don't know what the law is in Canada on libel and so forth. But if I say my cause is that my kid shouldn't have to wear a mask in school, or I shouldn't have to get a shot to drive my truck, and then somebody else says, no, that's not really your cause. Your real cause is Nazism. How are they allowed to say that? I mean, my understanding is it wasn't just the CBC, it was all the major media in Canada was singing the same tune. Is there no recourse to make them stop?
Well, I suppose that Tamara Leach or Pat King could come out and sue them for slander. I mean, there's kind of weird thing. The Toronto Star literally had a cartoon with a bunch of trucks, and they all said headed to Ottawa, and they all said fascism on them. So the Toronto Star is blatantly calling the whole convoy Nazis.
And the definition of fascism, my understanding, is pretty clear. It's corporate state condominium and suppression of all dissent. I mean, in other words, it's got nothing to do with protesters asking that some requirements be lifted. In other words, that's false on its face.
I know. I guess there probably are some people there who are like anti-immigration, maybe, you know, there's a sort of a pro-white kind of category that's not so much, you know, Nazi as kind of like saying, you know, white people who are tired of constantly having anti-white slogans thrown at them, which
Right.
is.
But in other words, why does the other side get to define your cause? So you're wearing a shirt that says "Free the North."
Free the North, yes.
I remember hearing, I don't know if it was Justin Trudeau or somebody else, somebody said, referring to these protests, that freedom is now a fascist slogan.
Yeah. Because, and once again, it's the exact same thing. I'm saying free the North as in end COVID's restrictions. And they're saying, oh, regardless of what you're saying, the reality is you're a Nazi. Therefore, everything you say is a Nazi thing. And if you're saying freedom, now freedom equals Nazism. That's the whole thing. And I go, well, what about COVID restrictions? Oh, they were going to be lifted anyway. You know, that's just a cover. You don't really care about that.
But I mean, you're a lawyer and words have meanings. Are they not responsible for anything?
Well, that's the thing. I would say that you could sue somebody for defamation. That would be the number one thing, but it would be a very difficult thing to do and very uphill battle. And kind of, it would take like 5 years. I mean, what happens when you're on Facebook or social media in general, and somebody says, oh, you're a fascist, you know, or you're a Nazi because, you know, because you say you like Ron DeSantis or something. Ron DeSantis gets called a Nazi all the time, right?
Yeah, but in the United States, we have very different libel laws, say, from England. If you're a public figure, you're fair game, pretty much. They can say anything.
Right. Well,
so an elected official, they can call a Nazi, even if he's not a Nazi. And indeed, the Democrats have called every major Republican figure a Nazi. In my memory, they called Trump a Nazi. They called Bush a Nazi. They called Newt Gingrich a Nazi. They called Ron DeSantis a Nazi. Rudy Giuliani, they called Mussolini because he was Italian, and they're playing on that stereotype. But this is, unfortunately, in our politics here, down here,
yeah,
it's allowed. But if you were to take a business person who had, say, a shop and say, he's a Nazi, and he's not a member of the Nazi party, that's defamation because they're not a public figure. They're protected, and you can hurt their business.
Especially if, say, they have a storefront and you spray paint like Nazi on it, you know, so you're doing mischief, damage to the property, and you're defaming the name. Sure, I'm sure you could I'm sure you could sue them. The question is how far you would get, because nobody does that. It's like, it's a good question. I would, I'm sort of on the wrong side of it because I defend people, I don't sue people, and
Yeah.
I don't prosecute people.
Okay.
So,
But
so my question would be, like, I haven't done it myself, but could you go to the police and say, this guy called me a Nazi? I'm not a Nazi. You should arrest him for defaming me.
well, I don't know. I don't know if we have criminal libel in the United States. I know in England they have criminal libel. I don't know what the law is in Canada.
Yes.
But
Sorry.
it's an interesting question, and we don't have it because it seems to me that the situation is out of control here and there and everywhere. But okay, so these people have to stay in jail until they're tried. One of them may be very right wing, and now this Tamara Leach. Do you know anything about her?
Well, there's an interesting. She says that she's Métis. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, they're sort of the French Canadian Indian mix.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a Métis rebellion, I believe, at one point.
Yes, Louis Riel back in like 1882 in the Red River Valley, which is now Winnipeg. That was kind of like a really important thing for the history of Canada, because it was Canada, going to the Métis and the Indians and really cracking down on them at that point. And it was like a really central moment where the Canadian government exercised its authority and made it clear that they were in charge. Because remember, in 1882, it was in the Wild West, just like it was in the States. So there were a lot of Indians and a lot of trappers. They all got together, got married. And then the fact that they were half Indian made them basically all Indian, and they rebelled. And then Canada cracked down. But anyway, you're learning a lot about Canada, right?
Yeah.
It's great. It's great. So anyway, so Tamara Leach says she's Métis. And it's the classic thing where Canadians bend over backwards to show how bad they feel towards natives. And now you have a native woman in amongst this band of Nazis. And how do you deal with that?
Well, they're not Nazis. Let's establish that.
I'm saying from the establishment point of view.
Yeah.
I'm speaking as an establishment point of view, you'd say, oh, we've got this band of people who we've called Nazis, and now their leader is Métis. It's like, oh, we don't, you know what they do? They say, she's not really Métis. She's lying. So when you say you're not a Nazi, you're a Nazi. When you say you're a Métis, you're not a Métis. You can't win. It doesn't matter what you say. They'll say you're the opposite.
And there's no defense against that?
Well, I mean, it's not a crime to say you're Métis, and it's not a crime to say you're not Métis. It's just like, you would have to, it's sort of like the birther thing with Obama. People saying to Obama, you're not really an American citizen. It's like, okay, well, so what? I don't need to prove that. I've got my passport. I've got my American passport. I don't care what some guy in Nebraska says about me. I'm American, and it's too late to worry about that. But obviously it's political. In this situation, it's political too. I mean, I guess Tamara Leach could drag out her grandmother and say, yeah, I'm a native, I'm a Cree. I was born on the prairie, in a teepee. I'm as Indian as you get. Here's my card, and yeah, this is my granddaughter, and she's Métis. Here's my boyfriend,
Okay.
Jean.
Well, it's an interesting wrinkle. I mean, I don't know if she'd get any more sympathy or not. Well, you had in our country, Joe Biden said, if you don't vote for me, you're not black. So it's defining your ethnicity by your political affiliation, which is, not how we traditionally did things. But
it's like all those purity laws are so fascinating, because this is my thing about racism, is that whenever you start obsessing about racism, you wind up in this weird place where you have to define who is what. I mean, the Nazis had that problem. They're anti-Jewish. Well, who's Jewish? What if you're, 1/8 Jewish? Or what if your grandmother, you know all about that, right? And so it got into weird things. And that was in the process of trying to kill them. But then in the process of trying to get affirmative action, oh, I'm Native, the Elizabeth Warren thing. And it's like, I'm Native, what? Why are you Native? Because I want to get a job at Harvard. And it'll be better if I'm Native. It's like you're trying to, take advantage of laws meant to help Native people or Black people. And so it's so stupid. Like, I wish we would just if you got rid of affirmative action tomorrow, you would never have to talk about race again, because it would never matter. It would never matter who, and everyone could be blended or whatever they want, and it would never matter, because it would never matter legally. And that's my main argument, like, in favor of getting rid of affirmative action.
Okay, well, we'll see if this case can help your cause or not. I don't know. It's so interesting because Canada seems to be able, like, one of the things interesting is no YouTube channels were blocked covering the Canadian protest. I could watch hundreds of hours of Viva Frey, whereas anything in America was blocked and censored about January 6th or whatever. And I think it's because you're in another country, Americans don't care about it so much. And yet, it was like you were living out what Americans wanted to do, but were too intimidated to do. And so that was what was so fascinating, why everyone thinks the Canadian truckers are such heroes. I mean, the supporters do, because they took action when everyone else was just sitting on their hands. I mean, that's my view.
And I wanted to kind of, I'm glad you said it, because it kind of circles back to what we were talking about at the start, that when I would speak on Facebook and then go to meetings, nothing happened. So it was so exciting that the truckers finally got that message out and got the attention. And so I never cared about the EA or the blockade or the tactics or the honking or the Nazi stuff. All I cared about is that I was happy that they were finally getting that message out. And it worked. And it went far beyond any expectations, from the Toronto Star noticing it to like people in New Zealand and across the world, and people like yourself noticing. And that, I think, absolutely, however you view, like all these stupid sideshows about Nazis, I was like, I don't care about those. None of those. You can call me nuts. Do this, whatever you want. The important thing is, now the government has heard loud and clear that a significant portion of the population are like, enough with COVID, and it worked. And regulations are dropping all over the place. It's great. So, So
even though there was a price to be paid by some people involved, it literally was the price of liberty, was the sacrifice of these individuals who are in jail, who've had their bank accounts frozen. I'm sure some of them are going to lose their jobs as truckers. Let me ask another question. Was there any organization behind this? I mean, how, we'd say Leach and King, I mean, apparently it's not the Teamsters unions, and apparently the drivers unions were against it in Canada. So was there any organization?
Remember, and the simple answer is yes. And remember, all those meetings, or all those rallies I was talking about that got ignored, those rallies were all the same people. And I bet you the trucker convoy was like 90% of those people from those rallies. And there were rallies not just in Toronto. So there had developed a network of people who were, ready to protest. And the trucker thing came down because, there was a specific law that, truckers in the States had to be vaccinated. But when they, stood up and said enough of this, there was this whole network and Maxime Bernier was a big part of it, of the PPC. So you have the Maxime Bernier, the PPC, Rebel News, a bunch of other people who were organizers could join with the truck. That's why it was so big, because there was a huge amount of support already that was there, clearly for everyone to see, but it had been ignored, right? So this was just the explosion of that basic.
I see. So for someone like yourself who'd been going to these rallies, what, for 2 years, you said, or for a while?
I mean, no, the rallies had been going on for probably about a year. I didn't go to every rally, but
But in other words, you weren't as surprised by people like us who just turned on our TV one day and saw it.
It's just a question of taking it to another level, from 5,000 or 10,000 people to 20,000 people in the nation's capital with trucks that could not be ignored. That's the difference. Just to me, just taking it to the next level. It's like, you won't listen to us now. What do we have to do to make you listen? And they found a way.
So even if in the short run, Trudeau has prevailed, that he cracked down, he had the Emergencies Act. The Emergencies Act was lifted. Do you see in the long term an erosion of support for Trudeau after this?
For sure, for sure. I can't see how any of this has ever been good for him. I think this is a shot in the arm for conservatives. I know the latest polling is that the conservatives were at like 39%. Trudeau was at like 31%. During the election, it was more like 32, 33. So I have to, the question is, we just had an election like last year. He doesn't have to call, he doesn't have to call an election for like, years. So, I can't see him calling an election now. He got a minority last time, right now the chance of him getting a majority are very slim. So I can't, I think I think everyone's going to just forget about this is what I was
really?
saying.
Well, that's
By the
interesting.
way, I kind of have to go now.
Okay. Well, it's
we all
perfect. That's perfect timing. I want to thank you. And
Oh,
we'll put michaelfairneylaw.com. I'll put it in the comments section. And if you send him a message on Facebook and show you're not making trouble, he'll let you talk to him on his Facebook page. And this should be posted shortly on YouTube and some other things. And thank you again for your expert analysis of the truckers situation before it's completely forgotten and pushed aside by the war in the Ukraine. So it comes one after another. So
and if somebody, if you send me a friend request on Facebook and say that you heard me on Lawrence Jarvik's podcast, that would be the best thing. And I'll accept you as a friend, and then you can hang it with Liz and I and all our other, anti-COVID type people.
Okay, well, great. Thank you again. And I'll stop recording now.